Go. Okay, the pivot joint and neck at occipital condyles and atlas is flexing. The ball and socket joint at scapula and humerus is in medial rotation. The hinge joint at humerus and radius and ulna is extending. The plane joint between carpals is neutral. The pivot joint between vertebrae is flexing. The ball and socket joint at coxal and femur is in slight flexion. The hinge joint at femur and tibia is flexing, and the plane joint between tarsal and tibia is neutral.
The joint in the neck at the occipital condyles and atlas are still flexion. The ball and socket joint at the scapula and humerus for the right is lateral rotation, for the left is medial rotation. The hinge joint at humerus and radius ulna is flexing. The plane joint between carpals for the right is extension and left is neutral. The pivot joint between vertebrae are in lateral rotation. Ball and socket joint at coxal and femur for the right is medial rotation and the left is lateral rotation. The hinge joint at femur and tibia is in flexion. The plane joint between the tarsal and tibia for the right is in neutral and left is eversion.
Pivot joint in neck at occipital condyles and atlas is in flexion. The ball and socket joint at scapula and humerus, the right is in medial rotation and the left is in lateral rotation. The hinge joint at humerus at radius and ulna is in flexion. The plane joint between the carpals is neutral. The pivot joint between the vertebra is in circumduction. Ball and socket joint at coxal and femur, the right is in medial rotation and the left is in lateral rotation. The hinge joint at femur and tibia is in flexion, and the plane joint between the tarsals and tibia, the right is in inversion and plantar flexion and the left is neutral.
Okay, the pivot joint in the neck and occipital condyles and atlas is in lateral rotation. The ball and socket joint at scapula and humerus is in right medial rotation and the left is in lateral rotation. The hinge joint at humerus and radius and ulna is in flexion extreme. The plane joint between the carpals, the right is in extension and the left is in flexion. The pivot joint between the vertebrae is circumduction. The ball and socket joint at coxal and femur is in extension. The hinge joint at femur and tibia, the right is in flexion and the left is in extension. And the plane joint between the tarsal and the tibia, the right is in plantar flexion and the left is in inversion.